Intense clash between Hamilton and Lando Norris after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. This is probably the first time you're hearing about this news, so I urge you to stay until the end before talking about it with your friends, because every detail matters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The 2025 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was already poised to ignite fireworks even before a single engine had roared to life. The tension crackled in the air like static electricity, hanging thick over the shimmering asphalt of the Jeddah Corniche circuit. The neon glow of the city lights reflected off the polished bodywork of the cars lined up on the grid, turning them into gleaming beasts ready to be unleashed into battle. Every heartbeat seemed louder, every breath sharper. Yet no one, not the commentators, not the engineers, not even the most seasoned fans, could have anticipated the sheer emotional eruption that would explode between two of Britain's finest. Sir Lewis Hamilton, the elder statesman of the sport, the seven-time world champion forging his final stand in Ferrari red, and Lando Norris, the brash, daring young lion of McLaren, desperate to carve his own legend into the annals of F1. Even in the moments leading up to the start, the atmosphere around the two was electric. Hamilton, helmet visor down, sat motionless in his cockpit, the calm before the storm. His breathing slow, controlled, almost meditative. Across the grid, Norris bounced slightly in his seat, adrenaline already surging through his veins, eyes darting toward his mirrors with the anxious energy of a man with everything to prove and no margin for error. The lights began their slow, methodical countdown. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, blackness. The grid exploded into motion, 20 missiles hurtling down the long run to turn 1 under the blinding floodlights. Hamilton's start was a thing of beauty, the purest expression of timing and instinct. From P4, he launched forward like a predator, instantly surging alongside Norris and Verstappen. In a split-second window, Hamilton positioned himself perfectly between the two, a masterclass in aggression and precision. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. But as the trio approached turn 1 at breakneck speed, the simmering rivalry between Lewis and Lando burst into flame. Norris, sensing Hamilton's presence inching ever closer, made a split-second decision, one fueled more by desperation than calculation. He veered left, squeezing Hamilton mercilessly toward the unforgiving concrete barrier. Lewis, inches from catastrophe, was forced to abandon his attack, jolting violently over the serrated curbs, his Ferrari bouncing and shuddering under the violent impact. Inside the car, Hamilton's fury detonated. His voice, usually a composed and commanding presence over the radio, now crackled with white-hot rage. "Did you see that? He just shoved me off. Bloody outrageous. Are we racing or are we playing bumper cars?" Ferrari's pit wall responded with a diplomatic, "Noted, Lewis. Race control is reviewing, but the damage, both physical and psychological, had already been inflicted." Hamilton's momentum was destroyed, his rhythm disrupted. Positions lost. Frustration mounting. Still, the true drama was yet to reach its crescendo. Over the next 25 laps, Hamilton fought back with the dogged tenacity that had defined his career. He picked off rivals one by one, clinical overtakes executed with millimetric precision, carving a path back toward the front. Each move was a statement: "I'm not finished. Not yet." And by lap 27, destiny and fury placed him once more behind Lando Norris. The tension in the Ferrari garage was palpable. Mechanics leaned closer to the monitors, breath held. Commentators could barely contain their excitement, their voices climbing in pitch. "Here we go, folks. It's Hamilton versus Norris, round 2. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Approaching the fearsome turn 8, a high-speed left-hander where bravery must drown out caution, Hamilton seized his chance. With the DRS flap wide open, Lewis hurled his Ferrari down the inside, wheels barely grazing the racing line. He was alongside, in fact, just slightly ahead, when they reached the apex. But Norris, stubborn to the core, turned in aggressively, leaving no room for Hamilton to complete the move cleanly. The cars kissed, a brief, violent contact, and the Ferrari was shoved wide, slamming into the wall with a shriek of tortured metal and a spray of golden sparks. Onboard footage captured the ferocity of the moment, Hamilton's hands fighting the steering wheel, the car bucking and jolting as it skimmed the barrier. Miraculously, he kept it pointing the right way. But the consequences were devastating. Loss of speed. Loss of positions. The dream of a podium, perhaps even a victory, shattered in a heartbeat. His radio message, when it came, was a dagger to the heart. Unbelievable. He turned in on me. Absolute madness. If that's acceptable, then what are we even doing anymore? The incident was immediately referred to the stewards, sparking a wildfire of debate. Replay after replay showed the moment, from Hamilton's onboard, from Norris's rear-facing cam, from the blimp overhead. The paddock was ablaze with controversy. Social media detonated within seconds. Hashtag justice for Lewis. Hashtag dirty driving. Hashtag let them race. Veteran pundits like Martin Brundle and Damon Hill weighed in immediately, their voices heavy with opinion. Lando crossed a line today. That's not hard racing, that's reckless endangerment, Brundle insisted. When you crowd a guy into a concrete wall at 250 kilometers per hour, you're playing with more than just positions. You're playing with lives, Hill echoed. Yet McLaren's camp predictably saw it differently, with team boss Andrea Stella defending Norris fiercely. That's racing. Two great drivers fighting hard. If we penalize that, we sterilize the sport, he argued. Meanwhile, inside the Ferrari garage, Hamilton's entourage seethed. Mechanics shook their heads, jaws clenched. Even team principal Fred Vasseur, usually a portrait of Gallic calm, was seen slamming his headset onto the pit wall desk. The battle lines were drawn, not just between two drivers, but across the sport itself. When the race ended, with Norris scraping a podium finish and Hamilton limping home P6, the post-race interviews crackled with barely contained venom. Hamilton, sweat-soaked, face grim, delivered a statement dripping with meaning. I've raced a long time. I've battled the best. I know what hard, fair racing looks like. Today wasn't it. Norris, ever the provocateur, responded with a casual shrug. If you're not willing to fight for it, you're in the wrong business. The media, sensing a golden feud, pounced. Headlines blared across the world. Hamilton and Norris explode in Saudi scandal. Lewis outraged, Norris crossed the line. British blood feud, Norris versus Hamilton divides F1 nation. And as night fell over the Saudi desert, and the fireworks lit up the sky over Jeddah's glittering skyline, the truth was inescapable. Formula One wasn't just about speed anymore. It was about pride. About honor. About two warriors, locked in a battle that transcended mere racing lines. The 2025 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix didn't just deliver action. It delivered a legend. And for anyone lucky enough to witness it, the memory will burn forever, as bright and as brutal as the sparks that flew from Hamilton's wounded Ferrari against the cold, unyielding walls of Jeddah. Hamilton's fury was cataclysmic, an unstoppable force erupting from deep within, surging through his body and into the team radio with an intensity that electrified the entire paddock. His breathing, typically composed even in the eye of the fiercest storms, now came in harsh, ragged gasps, each exhalation laced with sheer outrage. His voice, normally precise and measured, exploded with the ferocity of a cannon blast, words slicing the air like shrapnel. That's twice now. Twice. He ran me off the track again. This isn't racing anymore. This is reckless. We have to protest this. This isn't just aggressive. This is outright dangerous, man. It's completely unacceptable. The pit wall froze. Engineers stared wide-eyed at the monitors. In all the years of intense battles, monumental comebacks, and controversial duels, they had rarely heard Hamilton so unhinged, so close to detonating. Meanwhile, the duel with Lando Norris raged on. The two cars danced violently under the artificial lights, tires screeching in protest, carbon fiber brushing dangerously close with every desperate maneuver. They fought not just for positions. They fought for pride, for dominance, for the very soul of what racing meant. Every corner, every straight, was a battlefield. Every braking zone a declaration of war. And when the checkered flag finally fell, slicing through the tension like a guillotine, the order was brutal and final. Lando Norris seized an electrifying P3, fists pumping into the humid night air in exhausted elation. Lewis Hamilton thundered across the line mere tenths behind in P4, his heart pounding, his spirit ablaze with a white-hot fury that showed no signs of abating. Inside his Mercedes cockpit, Hamilton sat motionless for a moment, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly that the leather threatened to tear beneath his gloves. There was no celebration. No acknowledgement of the finish. Only raw, festering rage. When the car powered down with a mechanical sigh, Hamilton launched himself from the cockpit with a ferocity that made nearby mechanics instinctively take a step back. His helmet still clamped over his head. His entire body radiated a seething energy, barely contained, barely human. It was the look of a gladiator denied his rightful victory. Without a word to his team, without a glance to the waiting media, he stormed across Parc Ferme like a thundercloud made flesh, a human tempest moving with deadly purpose. He spotted Lando, standing atop his McLaren, basking momentarily in the cheers of the crowd, soaking in the jubilation of a hard-fought podium. But Hamilton wasn't here to congratulate. In one swift, furious motion, Lewis ripped off his helmet, flinging it under one arm. His face was a mask of pure anger, flushed crimson, jaw clenched tight enough to crack granite, nostrils flaring with each furious breath. With strides that seemed to shake the concrete beneath him, he closed the distance between them. And then, the explosion. Getting directly in Lando's face, close enough that the younger driver could see the fire blazing in his elder's eyes, Hamilton unleashed. "You call that racing?" he roared, voice hoarse from emotion. "Seriously? Pushing someone off track not once, but twice? What the hell were you thinking out there, Lando? Were you even thinking at all?" The paddock collectively gasped. Photographers scrambled. TV cameras locked onto them like hawks. For a split second, Lando Norris looked genuinely stunned, as if slapped by the sheer force of Hamilton's fury. His mouth opened slightly, but instead of apologizing or backing down, pride surged within him, fueled by adrenaline, youth, and the hard-edged confidence of a driver who refused to be cowed. "It's racing, Lewis." Norris snapped back, voice cracking with defensive heat. "It's hard racing. You of all people should know that. You had space. You could have lifted. You chose not to back out." The two drivers now stood toe-to-toe, chests almost brushing, the space between them crackling with unspoken threats and years of mutual respect now twisted by fury and frustration. Hamilton's fists balled at his sides. His voice dropped to a lethal low growl, more dangerous than any scream. "Backing out? Backing out when you shunt me off the track with no regard for anything except your own damn ego. That's your defense? You think that's how real champions drive? You risked everything out there tonight, not just your race but our lives." The silence around them was deafening. The paddock crews, the engineers, the FIA officials, even the fans craning their necks behind barriers, everyone held their breath, caught in the gravitational pull of two titans colliding. For the briefest heartbeat, it looked like it might get physical. Hamilton's muscles tensed, Norris's fists flexed. And then, Hamilton exhaled sharply, the sound bitter and full of disgust. The fury didn't leave him, it simply hardened into something colder, heavier, more permanent. "You're better than that," Hamilton said finally, his voice a grave, broken whisper. "Or at least, I thought you were." He gave Lando a look, not just of anger but of deep, profound disappointment, and turned away, marching off without waiting for a reply, helmet clutched under his arm like a wounded hart. Norris stood frozen in place, the weight of Hamilton's words sinking into him heavier than any trophy he could ever lift. Around them, the paddock slowly exhaled, like a collective soul returning to their bodies. Within minutes, the confrontation detonated across the world. Hashtag Hamilton versus Norris. Hashtag respect the race. Hashtag collision course. Hashtag Lewis livid. Within seconds, social media exploded with videos, fan reactions, slow-motion replays dissecting every angle. Every racing legend, from Jenson Button to Nico Rosberg to Fernando Alonso, weighed in on pundit panels, the debate igniting around the ethics of racing, legacy, risk, and ambition. Meanwhile, back in the Mercedes garage, Lewis sat alone. Helmet discarded. Race suit peeled down to his waist. A towel draped over his bowed head. In the silence, he stared at the floor, muscles twitching from the adrenaline drain, heart still hammering against his ribs. He wasn't just furious about tonight. He was furious about what it meant, that respect on track was eroding, that the new generation was willing to cross lines that he had spent his entire career fighting to uphold. And deep down, somewhere he couldn't admit even to himself, he was heartbroken. Because Lando was supposed to be different. Lando was supposed to carry the torch, not torch the legacy. And as the lights dimmed on another brutal night of Formula One history, one truth burned brighter than all. The battles to come would be bloodier, more personal, and more unforgettable than ever before. Because this wasn't just rivalry anymore. It was war. Hamilton's laughter, if one could even call it that, wasn't the light-hearted melodic chuckle fans were used to hearing. No, it was a sharp, cutting, almost cruel sound, brittle and raw like shattered crystal underfoot. Backed out. Hamilton's voice cracked through the humid post-race air, his tone razor-sharp and brimming with disbelief. His dark, fiery gaze locked onto Lando Norris, a firestorm raging behind his eyes. You didn't back out of anything. You turned in on me at turn 8 like I was invisible. Like I didn't even exist. You're lucky I didn't end up embedded into the bloody wall. That's not racing, mate. That's suicidal. That's reckless endangerment. The tension between the two men was almost tangible, a thick, oppressive force hanging heavy in the narrow service alley behind the Paddock garages. Around them, team members, journalists, and FIA staff froze in place, caught like deer in headlights, their hushed whispers quickly dying into complete, uneasy silence. Even the buzz of generators and the clinking of tools seemed to fade away, leaving only the rising fury between the two drivers. Norris, undeterred and unflinching, stood his ground. He exhaled slowly through his nose, then crossed his arms over his chest in a posture that screamed defiance. His racing suit, unzipped and hanging loosely around his waist, only added to the air of cocky nonchalance he projected. A smug, mischievous smirk curled on his lips, the very smirk that had both endeared him to fans and infuriated rivals. "Maybe," Norris replied with a sardonic lilt, his voice oozing mockery, "you're just not used to someone who doesn't roll over for you." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Gasps echoed softly among the bystanders. Hamilton's body tensed, his fists clenching at his sides, the sinews in his neck taut with barely restrained rage. Slowly, methodically, he closed the gap between them, standing toe-to-toe with the younger driver. His voice, when it finally emerged, was a venomous whisper, the kind that chilled the bones. "Keep running that mouth, kid," Lewis said, the words dripping with scorn. "You're not even half the driver you think you are. And sooner or later, the world's gonna see it." The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The animosity between them crackled like static electricity. It wasn't just a spat, it was an explosion years in the making, the product of rising egos, generational clashes, and championship ambitions boiling over. Before fists could fly or words could escalate into something even more irreversible, race officials hastily intervened. Two FIA stewards inserted themselves physically between the two drivers, hands raised defensively, firmly urging them apart with carefully neutral but unmistakably urgent body language. "Gentlemen, enough!" barked one official, voice firm with authority. "Walk away. Now." Reluctantly, almost theatrically, Hamilton backed off, his eyes never leaving Norris, burning with promises of future battles yet to come. Within minutes, Hamilton, still fuming, every muscle in his body taut with adrenaline and fury, was storming through the labyrinthine corridors of the Ferrari garage. Every hurried step sent vibrations through the polished concrete floor. Every set of wide eyes he passed belonged to a team member too wise to get in his way. This wasn't the cool, composed Hamilton the world knew. This was Lewis stripped bare, furious, betrayed, and determined. He reached the debrief room like a hurricane touching down, shoving open the heavy door with such force it ricocheted off the wall. The engineers inside, poring over data screens and race telemetry, jolted upright in their seats, startled by the sudden intrusion. At the head of the room, Frederick Vasseur looked up from his notes. He could tell from one glance, the storm he'd been dreading had arrived. Hamilton didn't waste a single second. His gloves, still reeking of sweat and rubber, slammed onto the conference table with a deafening thud. "Why the hell didn't we file a protest?" he bellowed, his voice reverberating through the room like a war drum. "Twice he forced me off track. Twice. And what did we do? Bloody nothing. Where's the team backing me up? Where's the bloody complaint to race control?" The room remained dead silent, every face frozen in a grimace of discomfort. Vasseur rose slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded lion, his hands spread in a calming diplomatic gesture. "Lewis, we reviewed the incidents live," he said, voice low, steady, measured. "We considered a formal protest. But race control classified both moments as racing incidents. No clear penalty to pursue. If we had lodged a protest without solid basis, we could have risked antagonizing the stewards unnecessarily." Lewis's nostrils flared in disbelief. He shook his head violently, pacing like a caged beast. "Antagonizing? Are you joking? If it were me forcing him off, I'd have been slapped with a drive-through penalty before I even got back to the pits. I've seen it before, different standards for different names. He slammed a fist onto the table again, sending data sheets scattering into the air like autumn leaves. Some junior engineers flinched instinctively, even veterans looked uneasy. Vasseur leaned in, voice dropping to a near whisper, attempting to reach the man behind the rage. We're fighting for a championship, Lewis. I can't afford emotional decisions. Neither can you. Hamilton stared at him, breathing hard, fists balled at his sides. His mind raced. Images flashed, the near miss at turn 8, the second shove at turn 12, the feeling of being abandoned by the very team he had given everything for. Finally, through gritted teeth, he muttered, "Maybe I'm the only one still fighting." Without another word, Hamilton grabbed his gloves, spun on his heel, and stormed out of the room, leaving a heavy, stifling silence in his wake. Outside the Ferrari motorhome, the media circus was already in full swing. Clips of the near collision were splashed across every screen. Pundits speculated breathlessly, was this Norris finally stepping into his own? Has Hamilton lost his political power in Ferrari? Is a civil war brewing inside Maranello? On social media, the debate raged like wildfire. Hashtag Hamilton versus Norris had exploded to the top of global trends within minutes. Fans clashed ferociously online. Some hailed Norris as the future king, taking on the aging monarch. Others rallied behind Hamilton, accusing Norris of disrespect, recklessness, and lacking the class worthy of a champion. Former drivers weighed in, some sympathizing with Hamilton's fury, others praising Norris's guts. Inside the Ferrari debrief room, however, the consequences were already unfolding. Senior strategists huddled, voices low and urgent. Discussions about politics, about race control bias, about Hamilton's mental state and whether the team needed to recalibrate their public messaging for damage control. Elsewhere, Charles Leclerc, watching quietly from a shadowed corner, exchanged a knowing glance with his race engineer. Leclerc understood all too well what it meant when Ferrari failed to back a driver publicly. The knives, as ever in Maranello, were always sharpened long before the first mistake was made. Meanwhile, Norris's camp was celebrating quietly. In their minds, today marked a seismic shift, a day when the unshakable giant had been rattled, and the balance of power had nudged, however slightly, in a new direction. And as darkness fell over the paddock, the cool Italian night filled with a scent of burnt rubber and rain-soaked asphalt, a single truth became impossible to deny. This wasn't just about a battle at turn 8 anymore. This was about pride. About legacy. About the old gods of Formula One being challenged by the new. And if today was any indication, the war had only just begun. Inside the inner sanctum of the Ferrari motorhome, the tension was electric, humming in the air like a live current. The usually pristine environment, a place of meticulously orchestrated operations and polished diplomacy, had been shattered by raw emotion. Every pair of eyes either darted nervously to the floor or locked themselves on computer screens, desperate to avoid the storm brewing in their midst. Lewis Hamilton stood at the center of the room, a figure carved out of pure fury and frustration. His race suit hung around his waist, his fireproof undershirt clinging to him, soaked in the sweat and exhaustion of a grueling battle. The white-knuckled grip on his balled-up gloves betrayed the volcanic energy he was holding back, barely. His voice, when it broke the unbearable silence, was low and sharp, like a blade sliding from its sheath. "No, Fred," he said, each word sharper than the last. "No more, we'll review it later. No more waiting. We needed to act immediately, not 10 laps from now. Immediately." Around him, seasoned engineers, strategists, and support staff shifted uncomfortably. Some pretended to adjust headsets, others buried their faces in telemetry data they weren't really reading. They had seen anger before, racing breeds tension, but not like this. This was something deeper. This was betrayal. "If it had been me doing that to him," Hamilton continued, voice rising, trembling not with fear but with barely restrained outrage, "I would have had a drive-through penalty before I even hit the next apex. Before I even crossed the next sector line." His frustration burst outward as he slapped his gloves down on a sleek carbon fiber tabletop, the sound ricocheting off the walls like a gunshot. A few startled team members flinched. "We've got to stop being polite," Hamilton thundered, his composure unraveling before the stunned room. "I need this team to fight for me the way I fight for you, every corner, Every pit stop, every risky late-braking maneuver where I put everything on the line. Ferrari's team principal, Fred Vasseur, tried to interject, speaking in the calm, measured tones of someone used to managing egos. He offered the usual corporate platitudes, promises of post-race complaints, reassurances that they would analyze the incident carefully, but the words evaporated on contact, meaningless against the white-hot inferno of Hamilton's disillusionment. He didn't want analysis. He wanted loyalty. He wanted war. And at that moment he realized, when he needed his shield the most, it wasn't there. He had been left to fight his battle alone, a gladiator abandoned by his own empire. Hamilton stormed away from the gathering, leaving a vacuum in his wake, as stunned silence swallowed the room whole. But the day's drama was only beginning. Hours later, under the searing glare of the podium lights, another fracture emerged, one that would ripple across the sport like a shockwave. The drivers took their places on the steps with visible discomfort, the traditional champagne celebrations feeling more like a forced ritual than a genuine moment of joy. The tension was so dense it practically had a physical form, wrapping itself around the top three finishers. Lando Norris, ever the cheerful provocateur, tried to pierce the heavy atmosphere with a casual, good-natured comment. "Good fight out there, Lewis. Hard racing, yeah." His voice was light, almost playful, but poorly timed, naive even. Hamilton, still simmering, still haunted by the injustice he felt on track and the betrayal he had endured off it, turned toward Norris. His expression was stone. His eyes were twin blades. Through tightly clenched teeth, in a low growl meant only for Lando to hear, Hamilton unleashed a verbal dagger. "Shut your mouth, Lando. Save your fake respect for someone who's buying." There was no smile, no nod, no forgiveness. Only raw, searing contempt. The microphones lining the podium didn't catch the words, at least not fully, but it didn't matter. In a sport obsessed with minutiae, with thousands of cameras and millions of fans scrutinizing every frame, the message was decrypted almost instantly. Lip readers, insiders, body language experts. The news metastasized through the paddock and exploded across the internet in mere minutes. The footage was dissected, slowed down, magnified. On Twitter, hashtags like #HamiltonUnleashed, #PodiumMeltdown, and #Lando vs Lewis trended worldwide within the hour. Reddit forums overflowed with furious debates. TikTokers created dramatic reenactments. Memes flooded Instagram. Journalists scrambled to file articles titled "The Moment Hamilton Snapped" and "A Cold War on the Podium." Some fans hailed Hamilton's fire, celebrating him as the last authentic warrior in a sanitized sport of corporate PR robots. Others criticized him, accusing him of losing his cool and disrespecting the new generation. But whatever side they took, one thing was certain: the world couldn't stop talking about Lewis Hamilton. In the paddock, the ramifications began to spread like wildfire. Rumors whispered of emergency meetings at Ferrari, hushed conversations behind closed doors about team culture, internal loyalty, and managing the emotional fallout. At McLaren, Lando's handlers rushed to get him away from microphones before any ill-timed comment could fan the flames further. Meanwhile, Hamilton said nothing publicly. No conciliatory posts. No PR-managed apologies. No staged handshakes. He simply disappeared into the night, leaving the sport to chew on the raw, bloody aftermath of the day's events. And deep down, whether they admitted it or not, every team principal, every driver, every fan knew the same cold truth. Lewis Hamilton was done playing nice. Done waiting for fairness that would never come. He was a lone knight now, charging into the final battles of his career with no patience for games, no tolerance for betrayal, and no appetite for empty platitudes. He wasn't chasing legacy anymore. He was defending it, by any means necessary. And God help anyone who dared stand in his way. The tension on the podium was suffocating, almost tangible, a crackling electricity that vibrated just beneath the surface of forced smiles and rehearsed celebration. As champagne exploded into the humid Arabian night and camera shutters clattered like machine guns, the world witnessed only the polished facade, three victors standing tall, grinning wide for the history books. But beneath the gleam of the trophy and the roar of the anthem, a silent war brewed. One that no lens could truly capture. Lando Norris flashed that familiar boyish grin, the grin that had charmed millions around the globe, but there was no mistaking the flicker of tension tightening his jaw. His blue eyes darted sideways toward Lewis Hamilton, their usual spark now shaded with something far darker, Defiance, maybe. Or was it doubt? Hamilton, seasoned by battles far more brutal and betrayals far more cutting, stood statuesque, his expression carved from stone. Yet, in the slight narrowing of his gaze, in the clenched fist behind his back, the truth was plain. This was no ordinary Podium. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words, with raw emotion. Every sidelong glance, every stiff gesture screamed the same thing. This was personal now. As the official duties wrapped up, the obligatory interviews, the national anthems, the contrived champagne spraying, the drivers peeled away from the public eye, disappearing down a labyrinth of white-tiled corridors behind the podium. Here, in the shadowed arteries of the circuit, away from the flashbulbs and roaring grandstands, the real confrontation ignited. Hamilton didn't hesitate. In a few powerful strides, he closed the distance between them, his movements fluid, predatory. He leaned in, close enough for Norris to smell the lingering traces of racing fuel and adrenaline clinging to his suit, and spoke, his voice low but razor-edged, slicing through the thick, tense air. "If you ever pull that stunt again," Hamilton murmured, his words steady yet simmering with unspent fury, "I won't be so generous next time. You'll find out firsthand what real, uncompromising racing looks like." The words didn't shout, they didn't need to. Their weight hit harder than any raised voice could have. It was a battle-hardened veteran issuing a warning not from anger, but from cold, calculated experience. For a moment, Norris froze, caught between the instinct to retaliate and the dawning realization that he had awakened something far bigger, far more dangerous than he had intended. But youth, glorious, reckless youth, would not let him back down. Summoning every ounce of bravado, Norris tilted his head slightly, flashing that infuriating, cocky half-smile, the one he always wore when he was nervous but determined not to show it. His voice was light, almost playful, but the slight tremor betrayed the adrenaline flooding his veins. "Looking forward to it, old man," he shot back, the final word laced with just enough sarcasm to make the temperature in the hallway drop 10 degrees. The words hung between them for a heartbeat. It was a shot fired across the bow, reckless, daring, and utterly incendiary. Instantly, chaos threatened to erupt. McLaren and Mercedes personnel, their instincts honed by years of managing fiery egos, rushed to intervene. Hands gently but firmly placed on shoulders. Mutters of, let's move," filled the tense air. Security guards positioned themselves like chess pieces between the two combatants, not with force yet, but ready, just in case. The moment broke apart, but the fracture remained. The wound had been opened, and it would not heal easily. The seeds of a ferocious, no-holds-barred rivalry had been sown that night beneath the desert stars. And they would not simply grow, they would fester, fueled by pride, ambition, and the unyielding hunger for supremacy that defined every Formula One champion. What had once been a camaraderie between Britain's past and Britain's future had crumbled into ashes. Respect, once mutual and genuine, had been replaced by resentment. The torch would not be passed peacefully. It would be torn from Hamilton's grasp only through fire and fury. As the teams packed their garages, as the VIPs toasted in their suites, as fans flooded social media with hastily captioned photos of the awkward podium, whispers surged like a tidal wave through the paddock. "Did you hear what Lewis said?" Norris didn't back down. "This is going to get ugly. Fast." By midnight, #Hamilton vs. Norris was trending worldwide. Clips of the podium stairs racked up millions of views within hours. Analysts on late-night sports panels dissected every micro-expression, every terse comment from post-race interviews. Pundits salivated at the prospect of a new gladiatorial feud. Old legends like Jenson Button and Damon Hill weighed in, cautioning that Norris had awakened a sleeping giant. Meanwhile, Hamilton loyalists warned that their man, their king, never lost these kinds of wars. Not without leaving the battlefield scorched and his adversaries forever marked by the encounter. Team strategists burned the midnight oil, already recalibrating their battle plans for the coming races. They knew the fights would not just be about lap times anymore. Psychological warfare, split-second gambles, elbows-out duels. This was what Formula One had always been built on, and it was back in a big way. Bahrain, Melbourne, Imola, Barcelona. Every upcoming circuit suddenly bristled with the promise of gladiatorial combat. Every corner exit, every DRS battle, every pit stop became a potential flashpoint. Because the truth was undeniable now. The battle between Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris hadn't just started. It had detonated. And there would be no winners without scars.